speaking of winter, I think some of the AI companies are having a bit of an AI winter of sorts themselves right now. So we have some big news, of course, that everyone is talking about. And by the time this airs, which is just going to be, tomorrow, but we're at the risk of being beaten up over how much news. I think I read 7 articles today on
Hmm.
this topic, and of course, we're talking about DeepSeek. And I always know it's that we're crescendoing into this like amazing amount of hype. When I was on the phone with my father yesterday, and he's asking me about it, it's like,
Hmm.
okay, wow, this was like way up there. So, what is your? I mean, I guess maybe you want to set the stage for everybody in case they somehow don't know what DeepSeek is, and I'm curious on what your initial take is after reading everything.
Yes. So, in case you haven't heard, Chinese startup named DeepSeek launched DeepSeek version 3, which seems to be an LLM that is on par with what we've been seeing from ChatGPT, uh, the 4.0 model, except at 95% cheaper. Which is a big change. And it's open source, which means that you can also dig into it yourself, host it, and avoid a lot of the costs associated with typically using AI. And the kicker is that DeepSeek claims to have built this model for $6 million and avoided the use of the most advanced NVIDIA chips in the process, since China is not allowed to buy those chips. So all of a sudden, if all of that is true, which I'm slightly skeptical about, this really turns the AI market on its head. At the very least, we can vouch for the fact that it is 95% cheaper and it is open source, so you can bring this model where you want, which in and of themselves is a big starting point for changing this market.
Well, sort of. So. I mean, it clearly it has rattled the markets for a variety of reasons, but most significantly, I mean, two major factors and two major hits is there's all these billions, hundreds of billions of dollars being pumped into this sector, and if suddenly it can be upended as they are
Mhm.
claiming, then of course that calls all these massive investments into question. Like, has this just been wasted money? And of course, NVIDIA takes the hit because their big claim has been you need these big processors
Mhm.
or these big chips to be able to build something like this. And of course, just to call this into question. But you said the key word, and so I'd like to start there on your take on if this is true, because I don't even know if we can say that the first part of it. The only thing I think we can certainly say right at this very moment is that it is open source. They have, in
Mhm.
fact, released it. You can go and download it. And their benchmarks are self-reported, but because they are open sourcing, and I'm inclined to believe the benchmarks that they've in fact developed this model because people are going to test that, and if it isn't matching those benchmarks, we're going to hear that pretty quickly. What I am not nearly sure about is their claim that they did this so much cheaper and without any of these advanced chips. Some of
Mhm.
the reporting claims that China has tens of thousands of these chips, so it would not line up with we don't have them. Um, and more than anything, if that were, I mean, they purported to be a research based organization. They did open source it, and I applaud that. But if they really did it at such a lower cost, then why are they not telling us how they did that? Because that it upends everything that we know about how these models get built. And by the way, a 670 billion parameter model, I don't know how you do that without that sort of massive investment in resources. So I'm curious what your take. You said you're a little skeptical. I mean, what's your read on this?
Yeah. So, although a part of me says there is definitely room to simplify the testing and development of AI models, um, yeah, it feels a little fishy at first glance. First of all, the $6 million cost, even if Chinese developers cost less than American developers, you still have to throw a ton of people at this problem to create the model. And you still have to do some level of compute. The Chinese developers at DeepSeek are saying that they have improved the testing and model development process by taking certain steps that are less, more deterministic, more rules based, more outcomes based, and being able to simplify some of the aspects of the model and some of the parameterization to avoid some of the costs associated with current AI modeling. And if that's true, I'm hoping they provide more detail on how that simplification has occurred, because I do admit that I do think it's not the best strategy right now for AI companies to simply throw as much compute as possible into the development of AI. So that would be a welcome step forward, and it would be good for the environmental issues that we're starting to be worried about with AI.
And
But
I'd argue it's an anticipated step forward, right? We are expecting that for all these reasons, that power consumption is too high, cost is too high, compute load is too high, all of those things. And so we've talked on this show about some of the research of people at academic institutions that are researching and testing different methods. And if a company came out and said we saw a 20% decrease in resource requirements, everyone would be going, wow, that's amazing, right? Because it's really hard. This is a very difficult problem to solve. And so for them to come and claim effectively a 95% reduction in those costs, it's astounding. It really borders on incredulity, is that the word? And I think we have to put in this other piece, right? It's a Chinese company. And so there's at least some folks out there that are publicly saying, hey, is this a psyops type thing as a way to undermine the AI market and to sort of undermine the lead that US based companies or Western based companies have. And I think if this was Mistral that came out with this, we'd be having a very different conversation. But because it's a Chinese company, because it is very clear that there's a sort of war, and we'll talk about Stargate here in a minute, this Cold War going on in the AI space at a geopolitical level. I think it really forces you to sort of put this all into context and cause you to question it. But I'd like to do a little thought experiment here around this. So let's just take all of these statements at face value for a moment. If it's all true, what does it do in your mind from a CIO perspective, from an enterprise perspective? What impact does that have?
I think it really speaks to the need to abstract the foundation models, because obviously the foundation model market is changing way too fast to honestly invest in any model or any vendor at this point. So you have to think a lot more about abstraction. I think this is great for companies like Perplexity, which have never aligned themselves to a single model, but to a service on top of the model. People were joking before. Some people have joked, "Oh, Perplexity is just a wrapper. There's no value to it." But increasingly, well-developed wrappers. Honestly, Salesforce is a wrapper on the Oracle database. Like, great apps are wrappers on service on foundational technologies, but it doesn't mean that they're not useful if they're designed well. So I think this puts the power more on the, call it, wrappers or apps associated
Yeah,
with
the
the
AI
AI.
application layer. What I think, my big takeaway on this, again, I think I am too very skeptical. Not that they've produced a great model. We always knew China would come up with a competing and a comparative model at some point, but the whole point of it being so inexpensive, that's where I'm skeptical of it.
Yeah.
And I think we also have that's the number one app on the App Store, at least purportedly right now, and that immediately sent, like, I refused to download it. That sends off all kind of warning signals about data being pumped into China, and who knows what the state actors do with that. So I think there's all these sort of concerns around it. But if it is true, to me, it's all it is a shocking, a shocking but fully predictable and anticipated race to the bottom. We always knew that, at least in my opinion, that LLMs were going to become commoditized. There are too many major players in this space, that they were going to find ways over time to reduce the cost, because we've seen this in every other technology industry, that the core infrastructure, which is what these LLMs are, becomes commoditized. It becomes this sort of foundational layer, and we just continually take cost out until it becomes the sort of baseline. Which is why I've always been, at the best middle of the road on NVIDIA over the long haul, because we know how the story ends. So to me, I look at this and say, all this is a very rapid and shocking acceleration of what we knew is going to happen anyway. And I actually, what some of the pundits have been saying that it's a good thing, or that it should be viewed as a good thing, because it means exactly what you're talking about, that we can focus on building the application layer that in whatever form that actually starts delivering the real value, that the LLM itself isn't the value. So it'll be really curious to see. But I'm curious, your take though is like the stock market hit and the sort of industry hit. It's been fascinating. My father, I told you, he asked me about it yesterday, and
Mhm.
I sort of said much of what I just said a moment ago, that I wasn't all that overwhelmed by it. And waking up this morning and to the flood of articles and the flood of posts around it was almost a little shocking to me. And so I'm curious
Mhm.
what your take is on the market reaction.
Yeah, so the intricacies of the market are a little bit beyond me, just because I haven't done my homework totally, but I feel like this is overreacting massively because even if all this is true and they made the $6 million model, um, the fact is, when you put these models into production, you still have to worry about inferencing and the ongoing management of the model. And you're still going to have to throw hardware at that like crazy to scale a model. And when you look at NVIDIA's sales, they're basically sold out for the next 2 years from a production perspective, anyways. And there's nothing that can change that. And we talked about last June, when we're looking at some of the academic improvements in research in AI, we were expecting an order of magnitude decrease in AI model development over the next couple of years, anyways. Like, if us dunderheads can see it, surely the brain the brain boxes at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs could have figured this out as well. The armies of people they have tracking NVIDIA. You're telling me they didn't know this? That's either ignorance, or or deliberately tanking the stock. I can't say which is which, but I can say that if we saw it coming, they should have seen it coming, and this is massively overreacting to what you think the future value of NVIDIA is.
Yeah, it's and I told my dad the same thing about this, that open source is great, but the reality is you still have to operate the dang thing. So it's a bit of a red
Mhm.
herring, right? And the massive cost. If you look at OpenAI's cost, there's two big components to it, or Microsoft, even, right? There's model development, but it's the ongoing operation. And it's always been AI's challenge, the scale problem of AI. The inference costs are dramatic. So it will be interesting to see if they are claiming. Right now, they're only talking about development costs. Are they
Mhm.
claiming that the inference costs are somehow cheaper? I haven't seen any performance efficiency gains on the inference level that they've reported. And that's really where the real bugaboo is with all of this. The second thing, and this, I didn't talk about this part with my dad, but the
Mhm.
second thing is, if I think about this from an enterprise perspective, open source has always been a red herring in the enterprise world, because we as enterprise IT people don't want to try to manage all this stuff, right? Even if
Right.
you're using open source, you contract with somebody who takes on all the headaches of dealing with that, because free isn't ever really free. And I think we have the exact same thing here. It's why Llama is out there as an open source model, and most enterprises are not deploying it. They're still going to Microsoft and the Azure approach, or OpenAI, or Anthropic, or AWS, because they need somebody to provide that extra layer. So I agree with you. I was almost bewildered and befuddled when I am seeing all of this response, and just everyone running around with their hair on fire, and it's like I couldn't quite get my head around it.
Yeah. That said, if you are worried about this, like from an operational perspective, I wouldn't worry about it so much. Like, there's so much more to NVIDIA is than simply the chip. It's really about the ecosystem associated with developing models and bringing them to production. And if you've put your eggs in the NVIDIA basket, you might as well stay there uh, for now.
Yeah.
Like, there's no huge change that should make you think, oh, suddenly all of this is useless.
Yeah, and if you're going to run out and go and deploy the API to the Chinese-based system, well, good luck on that one.